I'm going to take you back to the Sahara Desert as I start. Do you know the saying, from somewhere to Timbuktu? Well, my husband and I spent the first year of our marriage living in and around Timbuktu with the Tuareg nomads in the Sahara Desert. When we left, I was 8 months pregnant. This is me when I was about 22. And that was a miracle in itself because I spent the whole year in the women's tent and my husband in the men's. Living with the Tuareg nomads, we learnt to cross many divides. They are nomadic, tent-dwelling, Muslim, Tamashek-speaking, matrilineal, and pastoralists in an extreme environment. They laughed at how often our old Land Rover broke down, instead commending the speed and superiority of camels. They couldn't understand pictures of our house at home with kind of walls and a ceiling or a roof that boxes us in, because they have the entire sky as their ceiling. Living with these and other differences, we learned to communicate across many divides. We weren't trying to become like one another. We were trying to better understand our differences. And that has sparked the reflection I want to share with you today. I'm the founding director, as David said, of the Rose Castle Foundation, and our aim is to equip a generation of young leaders to act across some of the world's most challenging divides. We have all seen our societies fragmenting, polarizing. We no longer regularly encounter people who are different to ourselves. Instead, we often form our own image of them, and this image is reinforced and magnified by our social media echo chambers. And it's not a big leap from there to the kind of dehumanizing language that can and often does lead to violence. I've worked in many violent places around the world, and over the decades, I've witnessed repeated qualities of those very special people who can act across their communal divides. At Rose Castle, we call them the 12 habits of a reconciling leader. And I'm just going to share one of them with you today, and that's hospitality. Did you know that the Latin root of the word hospitality includes the meaning of host and guest and enemy? Traditionally, the act of hospitality turned a potential foe into a friend. For the Tuareg living in and around Timbuktu, the act of hospitality provides essential food, water, and security for travelers. It literally saves lives. And we were there before the internet, by the way, before the mobile phone as well. So when you see a kick of dust on the horizon, you know there's a stranger passing by, but you don't know if they're friend or foe. Nevertheless, you will light a smoking fire to signal refuge. You know that the host will honor the guest, and the guest will honor the host. Our young leaders flip this kind of hospitality on its head, and instead of being a host of others, of welcoming strangers into their own comfortable space, they take the risk of being somebody else's guest, of moving into their less comfortable space, whether that's sitting with the homeless, entering a space of worship that's not your own, or perhaps initiating a conversation with someone whose views are very different to your own. Jesus modeled this kind of radical hospitality. He didn't have a home of his own in which to welcome people into. He was always the guest of others, often riskily so. So at Rose Castle, we cross many of the world's most intractable divides, and our young leaders take that risk of being somebody else's guest when they work with us. We don't recruit people from the middle ground, those who are already standing in the middle, good as they may be. We much prefer to work with people who are firmly rooted in one side or another of any divide, be that a theological divide, a political divide, a racial divide, it doesn't really matter. They are rooted in their own side. And we find them in universities, seminaries, and places of worship. The very spaces, actually, where tomorrow's leaders are often being formed. And from the moment they agree to work with us, they take the risk of entering a space with somebody very different to themselves, even their enemy. So I'm just going to give you one example. Last autumn, we had a group from Princeton University who came to Rose Castle shortly after the horrific Hamas attack in South Israel. They included Palestinians and Israelis, and also members of competing university societies, Opus Dei and LGBTQ, for example, Tigers for Israel, and members of the Islamic Society, those who belong to an elite eating club, and others who have no such access. Together, they spent time experiencing one another's pain and longing firsthand. Together, they were eating. They were even sharing bedrooms. They were walking, talking, listening to one another, almost always with someone across a divide. And of course, in doing that, in listening to others who they haven't yet spent much time with, they are able to rehumanize, to rehumanize the narratives of people who are very different to themselves. They opened up. They asked really hard questions. And none of that was at all easy. Yet they persevered. And through listening to others without interrupting, they began to hear pictures that are bigger than their own picture. They began to recognize something of themselves in the other and something of the other in themselves, all of which gradually opened new horizons and enabled them to begin to explore the pain of division on campus, in part through a university society set up to facilitate a better quality of disagreement at Princeton. This society, the Rose Castle Society, is now in its 5th year. It's one of the fastest growing university groups on campus and has drawn high praise from their university president. It's playing a key role in facilitating some of the difficulties they're experiencing on campus as well as off campus. So what can we learn from our young leaders, and how do they open these kinds of spaces? Well, first of all, they are able to open a space in which to remember the past with others. By naming some of the wrongs, by naming the difficult relationships they experience, by naming the destructive divides, they are acknowledging pain and injustice, and they're doing that through very different lenses. They realize that their own memory is not the only memory. Gradually, by listening without interrupting, they are able to rehumanize those whose narratives they've stopped hearing or they've never even heard in the first place. They spend time around shared meal tables. As I said, they go for walks and talks. There's a lot of time. It's not just about hearing lectures. It's about spending time really getting to know someone who is extremely different to yourself. And we're not taught to do that normally as we grow up now. And in doing that, in sharing your own experience and in hearing somebody else's, you actually become more fully yourself. You become more fully human. And you're able to see the face of your enemy, sometimes for the very first time. All of which, in time, opens a creative space in which to reimagine the future, to collaborate with those whose narratives you've stopped hearing, and to do that with your differences, recognizing your differences, not ignoring them. So, radical hospitality and the 11 other habits of a reconciler are at the heart of our pedagogy for our young leaders. Our alumni, over 1,000 or so now, include government ministers, social media megastars, news anchors, business leaders, religious leaders, political, environment, education leaders. They may be a drop in the ocean right now, but their influence reaches far and wide. They are passionate advocates of a better quality of disagreement. Their leadership inspires and benefits us all. Little did I realize when I sat with the Tuareg all those years ago, the significance of their gift to us. Radical hospitality revolutionizes relationships. It is the greatest bridger of divides. It is the ultimate healer of brokenness. So please join us in taking the risk of being a host or a guest to somebody who is very different to yourself. No RSVP required. Thank you.